thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's exciting because I'm keen on just finding out about your journey myself, so I know everybody else will. And I should say as well, we will have time at the end for questions. So if you think of anything, lock it in, make a note. We'll definitely have plenty of time at the end. So going off of the theme of the pod, we're introducing you as a leader in entertainment. So please just give us a little overview on what that means.
What does that mean? Good question. Well, hopefully we'll find out by the end of this session. But I think, look, first of all, I think it's about understanding what you are personally passionate about and having real clarity on that. And I think we'll turn back to that. I think as well, it's about understanding these different industries and what the different routes in are, because there isn't one specific way, some of which, talk film specifically, are quite exclusionary industries. So how do you navigate that and how do you get in the door? I think another piece of it is around flexibility. You know, I think gone are the days where you have singular careers that, you know, you adhere to and so on and so forth. But, you know, understanding what you need to do to get to your end goal and what the different routes there might be. And we can talk to that. And then for me personally, I think there's a large element to this, which is giving back to people as well, because I was very lucky to get into the industry that I got into. And we could talk about that in a moment. But yeah, I think Sean Connery said it, talent is even, but access is very uneven. And that is very true of the entertainment industry. So
that is so true. And I agree with so much like you just said, that it doesn't have to be linear. There's loads of different ways you can jump around. It's actually more fun and less pressure to do it that way. So we'll obviously go through the whole journey. But what we always like to do is just go from the very beginning and show people that it's not necessarily always been a dream since you were 10, although it might have been. But did you always want to get into this? What did you want to be when you were growing up?
Well, look, I think the honest answer is I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to be when I was growing up. I was surrounded by people that I think had very clear, you know, I want to go into banking or I want to be an actor. And they had very clear pathways, whether it was, you know, subjects they would take or whether it was work experience they should get. And my entire academic career into uni and into the world of work, I had no idea what I wanted to do. Now, what I did know was, or what I was told, so I come from a low-income background, and my parents, my dad was a taxi driver, he was just fixated on getting as good a grades as you could get. He was, get a good education, that will stand you in good stead. So I spent my time just trying to find subjects that I could do well in, and just doing as well as I could in those areas. And that was great, and that was good. But, you know, what I did know very early on was what I was passionate about. Now, I'm a kid of the 80s and 90s, and I remember vividly getting my first video game console when I was like 7 or 8 years old. It was an Amiga 500, which is a floppy disk-based computer. You would put the disk in, you would wait 8 minutes for something to load, you would have your video game experience and rock on. And I remember at the time being absolutely enthralled by this. Literally, it was mind-blowing. I mean, nowadays it's quite funny to think about it, but then it was incredible. And I then went on this journey with video games, Nintendo, playing friends at Mario Kart, you know, immersing into these fantasy worlds like The Legend of Zelda. And it was, you know, as an 8-year-old, 10-year-old, this was amazing. And this was the beginning of that whole industry. I loved film. I grew up, you know, as I said, in the 90s. One might argue the heyday for film, you know, Pulp Fiction. I wasn't watching that when I was that young, but, you know, Mrs. Doubtfire, amazing. Films like Jurassic Park. And I remember being sat in the cinema when I was probably 9 years old with my dad watching Jurassic Park for the first time. Absolutely terrified, by the way, because it is, in fact, a horror movie. If you didn't know that, it's a very scary movie for a young child to watch. But actually being enthralled by this experience that I was seeing on screen. And I remember being sat there and thinking, you know what, I'm feeling all of this stuff. I wonder if this is kind of happening to the audience at large around me. And is that happening around the country? Is that happening around the world? And I think this was kind of the beginning for me of this real fascination with people and how they kind of consume entertainment. So why do people love video games? Why do people love anime? Why do they, you know, want to watch XYZ movie? Why do you engage in the Taylor Swift fandom? Whatever it may be. So yeah, that I think was the beginning of it. And I went on a big journey. But Yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I had no idea what I wanted to do, and that it was concerning. It was troubling for a long time. But I'm maybe more at peace with it now.
I think it's nice though, isn't it? Because again, you can get so much pressure when you're younger, or if you're surrounded by people knowing what they want to do, then you fixate on something, and then you feel like you have to go down that path. Mm-hmm. So I think that's nice to hear that you got it from like the hobbies of watching films. So did you study that at uni? Is that what you chose?
No, so to go back, I did GCSEs, I did my A levels. I just focused on subjects that I could do well in, and I chose a degree, which was English literature, that I thought I could do well in, because I was told get a good education, and then I was like, okay, maybe I'll figure it out after that when I've done that. So I went to uni and did relatively well in my degree. Came out the end of it and was saddled with a huge amount of debt, nowhere near as much as you would come out of uni with nowadays, but still a sizable amount of debt, and the need to just pay the bills. So I was like, right, now I've got to figure it out and get a job. I remember thinking, so I'd been writing for 3 years, so I was like, maybe journalism is the thing, because I've done a degree, and I went and managed to get some work experience in Southeast London and followed some journalists around. And look, it was an amazing experience, but it kind of taught me that maybe wasn't for me, and that was a useful experience to do. I'd spent years, during my degree, kind of writing plays and screenplays. I had some fanciful notion that maybe one day I could, I don't know, be the next Harold Pinter or something. But I thought, maybe I'll explore playwriting, and had some tiny success with that. I applied to a young writers scheme for the Soho Theatre and got a short play performed in the Soho Theatre in London. It was 15 minutes, but back then it was an incredible thing to see real people on the stage performing the words that you wrote and in real life. It was just like mind-blowing. But actually, from my background, it wasn't really a viable career financially to go into, because I didn't have any safety net or so on, or savings or anything, and so on and so forth. So I continued to look and try and find the right thing. And that's what got me to advertising, to an agency. Now it's WPP. Back in the day, it was Mediacom. And they had a graduate recruitment scheme. I thought, right, I'm going to go for this, amongst many, many other things. And applied. And I remember being sat in the interview and just boring them with my love of film and games and books and all the rest of it. And it somehow paid off, and I managed to get a role, the most junior role, but in their entertainment media group, as it was. So this is the part of the agency that dealt with entertainment clients. And that was great. That was a wonderful place to be. But I think what was kind of full circle about it was I finally got to work on brands like, for any gamers in the room, Capcom, which made Street Fighter. And I was like 9 years old, loving it. And then, fast forward 15 years, and finally I was in the office looking at like a large statue of one of the characters from the game, and I was like, I made it. And I couldn't say anything in the meeting, couldn't really contribute anything meaningful. I was holding the printouts because everything was paper then, and that was great. And that was, again, an achievement. I worked on some film clients in the advertising space, so a company called Entertainment Film. I worked on some music clients, so I worked on Island Records and Def Jam. Actually, a bit of a funny story about that, since we're in the music world here at Sony Music. So I was working on one of Mariah Carey's albums in the early 2000s. It was The Emancipation of Mimi, if you want to Google it. And she was coming into London to do a press junket, so where they interview her. And she was touching down in Heathrow, and she had to drive from Heathrow to central London. And being the most junior person in the team, I was tasked with mapping the possible routes she could take from Heathrow to her meeting in London, and making sure that every billboard that she could conceivably see if she were to look up from her phone or look out the window had a giant picture of her on it, of this album cover.
You never have any idea all the little jobs that are going into every little thing of these stars.
Yeah.
It's wild.
It's crazy. And that was like my first, I think, real experience with celebrity. It went well. She looked out the window. She saw herself. She felt as though she was ubiquitous in London. So, tick, job done. But I think, that was my first real encounter with, I think, celebrity. And there are many more that came, and they're interesting. It's happy to do it, at that time. But advertising for me, I think, was the real training ground for this kind of love of it's not even love, it's curiosity with people and audiences, because it really helped me understand, how do you identify who the kind of core or stretch audience for a film or a game or whatever it is, a fashion item might be. How do you understand the audience's needs? How do you know their barriers to engaging with you? How do you make a brand relevant? How do you make it culturally resonant? All these, like the kind of more technical training. And that was the beginning, I think, of that journey, which that kind of spun and continues to kind of inform everything I do.
I think it's really amazing to start in the agency side, because I think that's very different to agency to client side, which I know not everybody experiences, but I feel like starting that way is the best way to go before you go client, because it's hard work in agencies, isn't it? Like you just said, that job you just did for Mariah Carey, you wouldn't expect anybody to have to do.
100%. It's long hours. Yeah. It's hard graft. You know, you're there way into the evening. You know, you're dedicated. You're kind of putting in the hours. But it is great because it offers you, or at least offered me, a real breadth of exposure to music, to movies, to games. You know, you're not in the door, but you can get a feel for these cultures. Yeah. You can get a feel for what their business challenges are, because within advertising, certainly the good agencies are those that really understand their clients well, and that's really important.
100%. So you did the agency side and you did the hard work, and how long were you there for, and what was the next step?
Yeah, so I was there for probably about 3 years and absolutely loved it, but actually decided, you know what, I'm passionate about games. And I now have experience working on Capcom and another client, which was Vivendi, who did Crash Bandicoot and various other IP. And I was like, I want to try and get into the gaming space. So who's in the UK that I could conceivably work for? Xbox, you know, PlayStation, various other organizations. And I narrowed it down on PlayStation. I was like, I have to get in here. This is where I have to go. And applied multiple times for multiple roles, and eventually managed to get in the door. And I started off really working on PlayStation's online gaming as it was in the early 2000s. So nowadays everything is online by default, but then this was very, very novel. So I worked on launching PlayStation's first virtual world, kind of early metaverse. It was called PlayStation Life. We had 17 million people in this virtual world in like the early 2000s at one point. That's dancing wild. And talking and buying clothes. It was mind-boggling. And again, when you come back to kind of audience thinking, we were trying to deal with, what do we offer people to buy in a virtual world? Do they want t-shirts? Do they want hovercrafts? Do they want what on earth, you know, how does this economy thing work? And that was absolutely fascinating. And then I worked on launching some of their IPs, and the last one I worked on was The Last of Us before I left, and has recently resurged in culture, and that was a real kind of wild ride from, you know, green light, which is before it's actually signed off and made, through to release, and the kind of critical acclaim that came with that. And that was great. But, you know, as I'm kind of restless, curious, and was like, right, now it's time to try something new. And then I moved to Universal Pictures.
Is that something well, actually, I think one thing to press on is it's really important is that you didn't just apply for one job and got it. Like, you have to apply for loads, you have to keep going at it. And I think that's the side we don't see from everyone's journey. So I think it's really good to share that. But secondly, moving on to Universal, which is obviously a huge name as well, but is that something you recommend, kind of moving around? Or is that just something personal that you feel like you have to do?
So I think, just to go back to your previous point, resilience is deeply important, 100%. Everybody gets knockbacks all the time, regardless. So it's, in my mind, you know, there are challenges, you know, things won't go well, they won't go well in your job, but it's how do you deal with them? How do you take that challenge and translate it into a learning opportunity, or shift it into something else, because it will happen. So how do you kind of harvest that in the right way? But Universal, again, it was partly a dream of mine, looking at that industry. At the time, it's kind of flipped. At the time, gaming was kind of desperately emulating film. It was all about being as cinematic as you could be in these games. If anyone's played games like Uncharted or even The Last of Us, they're very cinematic experiences. So game was kind of emulating film. It's by the way, it's inverse now. So film is jumping all over game, like Super Mario and so on and so forth. And I was like, I really want to experience this industry. And I had some contacts from my time in the advertising agency that had moved to Universal Pictures, and that was my in. And I think it's really important to know your network as well as you can, and And also, you know, you don't want to burn bridges with people, because these people are moving with you through these industries over the years and over the decades, and they might be able to open the door for you at some point in the future for something that might crop up. So, yeah, one of the people I worked with in the agency was at Universal Pictures. They let me know that there was a job. I applied, and I joined and set up what was an emerging research strategy and analytics function for feature film, which sounds maybe quite dry. But this was a time when, film is a very relationship-driven business, right? So we've got a great script, we've got a relationship with Tom Cruise, Angelina Jolie, or whoever it might have been. We're going to put them together, and it's going to be box office gold. But you had players like Netflix and Prime emerging into the market, and it became increasingly important to just have more insight, more knowledge about what the audiences want, because these digitally native platforms like Netflix know what you're watching.
Yeah.
They know the genres you're interested in, and they're able to make content that's able to attract audiences. So the legacy studios have to keep up. So there was I was there for close to, I think, 8 years, and it was a huge growth period of kind of having the right insight to develop the right strategy. And by that, I mean, what do we greenlight? Do we make another Minions movie? Do people want another Bridget Jones? Is it Walking Dead? Is it, I don't know, another Jurassic? What is it? So, and that's one example, but like, how do you make the right trailers? How do you predict the box office so that you can manage the advertising spend? So some really kind of fascinating areas. So that was another wild ride. A bit of a fun story, actually, or kind of happenstance. So so my name's Elliot. I was going to be called Luke because my parents, big movie fans as well, they wanted to call me Luke after Skywalker because I was born the year Star Wars came out. But Luke Linger sounds a bit kind of, I don't know, cowboy-like maybe. It doesn't quite have a ring to it. So they named me after E.T. So Elliot, if you've seen E.T., is the main character in that. And I finally arrived at Universal Studios, and there's this big kind of E.T. thing, and it was kind of a very kind of kismet moment. I don't know. It was nice. So,
you were born to work in
born to work there,
honestly. And you worked on Jurassic at Universal, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of like a full circle moment from watching it as a kid and then working on it there. That must have been so much fun.
It was a blast, and it was interesting because the challenge with Jurassic World was we had a huge target for it, right? We'd had 3 films, you know, they'd done really well. But actually, the ambition was to cut $1 billion for Jurassic World, which is kind of this region of performance that very few films can get to. The reality is that we had kind of a legacy group of people like me that loved the originals that would probably turn out. But we had to then engage a whole new swathe of audiences that maybe had never watched them before, and in countries around the world that had never experienced it before. So there was a real strategic challenge in Jurassic, which was, how do you offer something that delivers to the fandoms, it has the lore and the Easter eggs and so on and so forth. It doesn't alienate that group, but is able to really bring in these new audiences. And how do you get that balance right? But a funny story actually about Jurassic. So yeah, as you said, it was a full circle moment. I was fanboying, or tried not to, obviously, in the workplace, keep it under wraps. But like deep inside, cool. I was fanboying. And I remember getting to watch the film, obviously slightly before it came out. So I was sat in the studio, and the lights go down, and the Universal logo comes up and gets into the film. And the first dinosaurs appear on screen. And what I actually saw instead of the dinosaurs was a ping pong ball on a stick, because they hadn't actually edited the dinosaurs into the film at that point. So I spent 90 minutes watching Jurassic World when it was ping pong balls and puppets. But nonetheless, it was a good experience.
That didn't ruin the magic for you?
It didn't ruin the magic for me. No, I was very happy with it.
And that sounds like a crazy 8 years and working on huge IP. And I speak for myself that we always want another Bridget Jones, right, maybe? But you obviously were there and you loved film, but you decided to make another move to a big place. This is where you went to Lego, right? So I've written it here because it's quite a big title. So Global Head of Portfolio and Audience Development at Lego. What does that mean?
What does that mean? Well, I think in simple terms, it's about being audience-centric, and it's about understanding what our audiences want. So Lego as an organization has been growing enormously over the last few years for a number of reasons, right? So we're seeing culturally, people are probably a little bit saturated with digital and AI, and they're craving physical, real-world experiences. You know, the offering has grown from just kids into to adult consumers as well. And really the function was all about having the right audience insight and the right audience strategy to develop the right products for our end consumers. So we developed this approach which is anchored around passions. So I'm passionate about video games and I'm passionate about movies, but there are people here passionate about travel or music or sport or whatever the case may be. And do we have the right portfolio of products to deliver to everybody if you were to be interested in Lego? But that was a big shift, culture shift for the organization, because before this function existed, it was very bottom up, kind of franchise first ways of working. We had to take the organization on more of a top down audience first journey, which continues to this day as well. And I think all of that audience ways of working, fascination, it just manifested again in a slightly different way, albeit in a slightly different industry.
I think also in the title with it saying like global head of, that's a huge title, and it hasn't happened overnight, but you must have worked your way up. Did you just keep working your way up titles, like different titles for yourself?
So from a kind of global geographies perspective, I started UK advertising. I then went to EMEA at PlayStation. I then went to international, excluding US, at Universal, and then went to global at Lego. That was my journey.
Right.
Other people have different journeys. The reason I took that journey is that I'm fascinated with cultures and people, and actually got the most energy as I learned on that journey from understanding what do people in, I don't know, South Korea versus Tokyo in Japan want from the next Minions movie? Because what they want is inherently connected to their culture, right? And I'll give you an example. It's I don't know, isn't it? You see what you make of it. But we, in the early 2000s, the studio acquired the rights to 50 Shades of Grey. Now, for those of you that don't know what that is, that was a big popular erotica novel in kind of the early mid 2000s. It was huge. And we, had the rights to the film, and we were going to make this trilogy. And as we were working on it, and it wasn't necessarily my cup of tea, and the critics weren't big fans, but what was clear is there was a very sizable audience for this movie. But you could position it in different ways so that when you saw this, whether you saw the trailer or the poster or so on and so forth, it felt very suitable for a group of women to get together or for partners to go together, friends. But actually, when you got to the kind of geographies of it all, you could see that by positioning this film in different ways, in different cultures, you got a very different response. So to give you an example, if you position 50 Shades of Grey as a romantic, happily ever after, wedding dress, very light, she's swept off her feet, consumers in Australia and America were like, I'm in, love it, I want to watch it. In Germany, they were like, absolutely not, hell no, this is not for me. If you made it really edgy, dark, literally put chains in the trailer, Germany was like, right, that's it, that's the one I want to watch. Australia and the US were like, no, this isn't for me. But again, that connects to kind of culture, religion, society, and that manifests in all of the ways in which we engage with different fandoms. And I find that endlessly fascinating, how it moves, and then the benefit of that for a business is that's what drives growth. Because if you can understand that, you can then grow your IP, you can grow your fandom, you can understand how to shift the brand from feeling less relevant to more relevant.
And that seems to me like quite a niche interest, being interested in how to advertise to different markets. And you've learned that just by jumping around those different roles. So you wouldn't have done that if you hadn't gone from UK to global, for example.
No. Which I think is to my point around curiosity and flexibility and adaptability, because I always had a pretty clear sense of I wanted to be in entertainment. But what became very clear to me is that, yes, I think film and you think movie director, but the reality of film is it is an enormous industry with myriad roles that, if you're more introvert, extrovert, numbers oriented, creative, whatever your flavor is, there will probably be roles that will deliver to what you need, but people just don't know about them. So, I was in a more strategic analytical space, which was incredibly additive, but many people I would interview when I was bringing people in would have no idea that these kind of roles existed. So that's why I think that kind of curiosity, lean in, find out how it works, and then where your passion is and how you can bring these two things together to add value. Because I think if you don't have clarity around that passion, or you're misaligned with it, you'll feel it because you won't be in flow. It just won't work for you.
Yeah.
If you can get closer to that, you'll feel it and you'll know it's right.
Most definitely. You have to try the things to find out what you're good at and what is your passion, because you spend a lot of time working, so you cannot hate it. There's too much time doing it. but you do have to jump around and try things. So I feel like being, as a film lover, you were really immersed in it in Universal. And now I would think going to Lego isn't as immersed, but still in the creative. How's that jump been?
It isn't as immersed, but I am still followed by the minions.
Yeah.
They still exist in Lego form.
They're everywhere.
They're everywhere. No, I mean, it's a very different industry, honestly, Lego. It is a consumer product. But I think what is synonymous across these different entertainment areas is this notion of understanding kind of a fandom, and how do you work with that fandom, and how do you respect that fandom and kind of integrate with it and be relevant to it, right? So whether that is working on, I'll give you an interesting example for Fast and Furious, actually. So Fast and Furious is a franchise, many of you may know it. It's had, I think, 10 movies now at this point. But there came a juncture probably around Fast 6 where, we were just consistently reconnecting with the fandom, and, it wasn't feeling quite as relevant to them. And I've seen 6 of these, so I need to, what is fresh and different? And I think by shifting the aperture to thinking, all right, so we've got this community here. How do we broaden it? How do we bring new people into this story? It also adds a lot of value kind of over here. So I think really understanding how these different cohorts work and the value you offer is really important. And that is true at Lego as much as it is in film and gaming and so on and so forth.
It's a good example there of transferable skills as well. You don't have to have been in that exact industry or that exact job, but there's things you can pull from your experience.
100%. And I think it's knowing what those skills are, right? Because you probably aren't consciously aware of them, but all of this is transferable.
Yeah.
And as I fast forward to, the world of work in the next 5 years, 10 years, my sense is that adaptability and flexibility is only going to become disproportionately more important as we see. I mean, I'm reflecting, I've got an 18-month-old son, and so I'm millennial. There's probably a lot of Gen Z out here looking at the crowd. And he's Gen artificial. That's the first generation. He's 18 months old, the first generation that will grow up entirely surrounded by AI.
Wow.
And I've been reflecting on what does his education look like, right? What does his career pathways look like? Because the reality is the education systems that exist around us now, I don't think are going to be necessarily completely fit for purpose. The career opportunities that you could move into will likely be quite different if you think about the speed at which AI is moving. So I'm reflecting on what skills can I equip him with, even though he's 18 months old. And it's things like creativity, it's things like adaptability, it's things about it's having that fluidity, I think, and so sorry, side notes, but something I'm clearly thinking about.
So amongst all of this, and you just mentioned that you're a dad to a very young child and stuff, you're also a trustee on a lot of boards, right? So there was Creative Mental Network that we're at now, there's Somerset House, there's Comic Relief, which are huge names. Having something outside of work to focus on is a lot, but how does that come about? How do you become a trustee of something like this? So I guess the honest answer is because I'm passionate about what they do. But yes, I'm on the board of Screen Education Edinburgh, and actually recently stepped down from CNM. My tenure finished after 5 wonderful years with the organization. But these two, so Screen Ed is all about driving access to the film industries for marginalised young people in quite deprived areas of Scotland. The work they do is transformative. It makes people's dreams literally come true. The work that CMN do as well, breaking the class ceiling, is, as I said, I come from a low-income background. I had luck, and, there was a lot of pushback and there was a lot of tenacity, but it is increasingly difficult to get into these, quite exclusionary industries, to be completely honest. And the work that CMN does is absolutely incredible. And I'm deeply passionate about it and want to contribute in whatever small way I can. But that is also true of Somerset House. If you don't know, it's a kind of a UK cultural institution in Waterloo. Some amazing stuff on there at the moment. Do check it out. But those guys, they they have a talent incubator program. So we are bringing people and helping them build their businesses. And again, check it out if you're interested. It's very creative. There's a lot of kind of pathways there, funding opportunities. And then Comic Relief, hopefully people will know, is addresses a lot of the root causes, poverty and so on and so forth. So to answer your question, I'm passionate about it and, want to contribute. And it's not easy, to be honest. No.
If I'm talking about work at Lego, an 18-month-old, and these different boards, I'm spinning a lot of plates, and honestly, bits of that aren't working, and I'm conscious of it. And I'd love to go to the gym way more. I'd love to do more over here, and I think that's a journey that I'm on to figure out. But I think that the audience curiosity and that audience red thread that I think started when I was 9 years old is still applicable to these non-profits. So to give you an example, James Bond is a 50-year-old franchise in the UK. It's got an aging audience. It is challenged to connect with younger people, to be culturally relevant. It needed to grow outside of its, UK and European heartland for the last movie, which was No Time to Die. Comic Relief is a 40-year-old UK brand. It's got an aging audience. It needs to connect with younger audiences. It needs to be culturally relevant. These are two very different organizations, an IP and a charity, but they have quite similar challenges from an audience perspective. And I personally get a lot out of kind of helping both kind of crack those problems. For comic, it's how do we bring in more people to the brand? How do we encourage more people to give? There's a lot of kind of,
crossover.
Yeah, crossover there. Yeah.
I think it's also very interesting, like you say, because it can make you very time poor and you've got to be passionate about it. But also, I think it's quite important to be building something outside of your career as well, which I know sounds annoying because it takes up your time. But it can teach you so much and make you better at your job. And it can also lead you onto places and meeting new people that you wouldn't get that just with doing your day job.
Completely agree. And I think a lot of the things that I lean into outside of the day job are skills, areas I'm curious about, and things that I want to learn about that I don't necessarily get exposed to in my day job. So I think this notion of portfolio approach is really important, because I think when you come to interviewing, getting into these places and spaces, you can point to this experience very, very tangibly, whether it's paid for or not. I think it's great to have it there.
Definitely. I totally agree with that. And I think it's just also saying yes to opportunities, and even if they don't work out, you learn something from it, which I know we've said throughout. So just another thing as well that you've got is this short film that you were an executive producer on, right? A Friend of Dorothy. Now, I watched this week and I thought it was amazing, and it's obviously got huge names in it. It was Oscar nominated, right? Which is wild.
It was, incredible.
That's amazing. Yeah. That's like the highest honor.
Yeah.
How does that come about, being an executive producer on something like that?
Yeah, so A Friend of Dorothy, if you haven't seen it, is a short film. It's currently available on Disney+, so have a look at it if you have access to Disney+. It stars Miriam Margolyes and Stephen Fry, and it's a wonderful little story, and it's about growing old, and it has LGBT themes. I come from an LGBT family, so it's quite personally relevant to me. And so the way it happened is that a script dropped into my inbox when I was on parental leave back in 2024 with my son. I read the script. I'd been at Universal, for years at that point, and had read hundreds of scripts and could very quickly tell what was probably a good script versus a less good script. I read it 20 minutes and I was like, if they can make this they send the kind of treatment, which is, we want to have Miriam and we'd love to have, this is what it might look like. And it's like, if this can happen, this will be wonderful. With no ambition beyond, I think this would be a lovely story for people to see. No sense of awards or anything like that. And I personally contributed to financing it, to getting it off the ground, and kind of helped from kind of a more, strategic point of view, because there was a production team that was doing the day-to-day, getting the cameras in, getting everything sorted, but kind of helping from that perspective. And this wonderful film got made, and it went on an incredible journey and picked up a ton of awards, and then managed to get to the Oscars. And that was a real pinch me moment. But the team deserve it. They did incredible work, and it's a wonderful little story. And
yeah, it is amazing. I highly recommend it. It's so good. And I think, like you say, so a script coming to you, that's from you being in those circles, people knowing that's something you might be interested in. People always say like the film industry is a small industry, really, which seems a bit crazy, but it is. So making sure people are aware of your passions and that they can reach out to you, that you're approachable. That's how this has come about.
I think that's really important. The person that emailed to me, I didn't know them. It was just a friend of a friend had said, go talk to that person, because they were like, oh, the themes of this, he'll probably be interested in it. And I think you have to kind of try and network as best you can. I'm an introvert, and I really honestly struggle. I don't have the energy to network as much as I would like to, because I just get more energy being at home and kind of curled up in front of a movie playing a video game. Actually, I don't have any time to play video games. I watch them now on YouTube. Yeah, I think it does require energy, and it does require you to kind of push yourself out of your comfort zone a lot of the time. You said about saying yes earlier, and the amount of times you have to say yes in your career when you really don't want to do something, but I feel like you do it and you learn from it. I mean, to give you an example, it's a kind of relevant to film example. I was asked by my boss when I was at Universal Pictures to tell Tom Cruise that his movie wasn't going to open, it was going to fail.
Oh God.
And I was like, and so we have this data in the film industry, it's called tracking data. And it basically tracks the awareness of a film and the interest of a film in like the UK and different markets around the world. But what it can do is give you, enables you to predict the box office. So if awareness is low and interest is low, people probably aren't going to want to see your film, right? So the execs in the industry are poring over this data twice a week because it's ultimately dictating what is going to happen. And we'd seen for a long time that a film that Tom had produced and starred in was not looking good. And it's not abnormal to go into the filmmakers and tell them a version of this. But Tom is unique in that he is one of the most literate in the film industry, having been in it for decades, and actually understands the data. So there was no, telling him a slightly different story. And honestly, it was terrifying, before going, star power aside, because, he's a person. This is just a heavyweight that's going to probably challenge you back in quite a sizable way. But that was a learning opportunity. And now I don't have any issues going and telling people bad news. Yeah. But I think it comes back to whether it's him or anyone that you might engage with in the world of work, meeting people where they are, right? Understanding what they want to get out of this exchange. For him, it's like, I've invested financially. I've put time into this. I want this to do well. So I had to come to him with, it's not looking good, but this is what we're going to do to try and make it good.
Yeah.
But that is true of every encounter that you have in the world of work. What do people want from it? And what are you trying to get from it as well? And how do you meet them where they are?
Yeah, like come with solutions, not just the problem. I think also good messages for that person that sent you the script that didn't even know you. Always send the email. Like, what's the worst that can happen? If no one comes back or you get a no, you haven't lost anything, always send the email. Be brave.
100%. Be brave.
Yeah, for sure.
I agree. Yeah.
So obviously, the creative industries are changing all the time, and I think they can feel really hard to get into, but I also think there's a lot more options in there that people are aware of. What would your advice be for somebody that's getting into the creative industries these days?
Yeah, I mean, we're in a really, really interesting place, I think, at the moment when it comes to the creative industries. Film, gaming. So obviously, massive bump, well, for gaming, for example, massive bump during COVID. Really challenging now. The entry-level jobs are difficult to find because the organizations are recalibrating. Film is in an interesting place when it comes to AI and the role of AI and what impact that is going to have on the industry and associated ecosystem. But there's a ton of opportunity. People still want to tell and hear stories. The formats might be changing, but it's still relevant. Gaming is still the number one entertainment space. So I think it's tenacity. I think it's being clear or as clear as you can be around what you want to do so that when you do get in the door, you can articulate it passionately and clearly. Yeah. Because the reality is in a world where it's much more competitive, you want to go for the person that knows what they want to do and why. And then I think this flexibility and adaptability point I opened up with, I think it's going to be increasingly important as we navigate. The industries are changing, the roles are changing, so you kind of have to change with it as well and embrace that. So yeah, that's what I
think that's excellent advice. Do you have one career highlight, or is that too tough a question?
Oh, that's possibly too tough a question.
It would be.
One career highlight. I think, look, the Jurassic World moment was wonderful. I think just being on the studio when you've kind of dreamt about. I mean, look, to be honest, when I was growing up, my parents being in these places was like so distant. It didn't feel in any way achievable. There was no, they had no network. There was, if I'd say to my parents, I want to be in film or games, they'd be like, what? No, how is that conceivably possible? You're crazy. So I think just the tenacity to just keep trying, keep getting back up, dusting yourself back down, and pushing outside of comfort zones is what kind of got me there in the end. And I think finally arriving, that was wonderful. But these things in life are kind of fleeting. You shift and evolve, and my priorities have shifted, now. And I think you have to kind of embrace that on your journey as well.
It's hard as well, isn't it? Because you reach for something, and then as soon as you get there, you're like, what's the next thing? It's really important to be present and be like, I dreamt of this moment once.
Yeah.
And it's finally here.
100%. And not to get kind of too psychological about it, but I think, me personally, my belief is, we only have one go at this world that we're in. We only have one chance. So I want to say yes. I want to push myself. I want to try and do these things that people have told me are not possible, and see if I can do it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't.
But you learn something either way.
Exactly.
So you've had an amazing career and you've done so much, and it's clear like you're passionate and you work hard at it. What is the dream? What is the goal for you?
I think the dream and the goal is finding some kind of balance within all of this, right? What's not going to change is my curiosity, my desire to learn and do new things and so on and so forth. But I think getting that balance right, and my priorities have shifted, as I mentioned, in terms of family. This is a time where I want to be more present there, and that's deeply important. So how do I balance all of these things together? And the honest answer is it's not easy, but I think you have to kind of reflect on it and do the best you can and be kind to yourself on the journey as well.
Definitely. Well, that was amazing. Like, I loved that. And I think that was super, super interesting. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh, a pleasure.
And I think we'll open it now to questions if there are any out there. I can't see too much, sorry. But Miles has a microphone. Do you have a question? Miles is going to come. Or do you just want mine? Yeah, sorry. Stick to protocol.
Hi. Really great
Hello.
talk, by the way. Last of Us was a masterpiece. And I want to ask, how did you guys greenlight certain games? Do they always come creatively from the houses like Sony and Universal? Does it ever come to be where there's, I don't know, a creative person like in amongst us, like here, that has the idea and maybe doesn't have the whole full 3D world of it, but has the treatment? And yeah, how does that whole work for it?
Yeah, so there are multiple ways into it. So the way that Sony works is it has its own first-party studio. So it owns specific studios that kind of make and incubate games. They will come up with ideas. Sometimes they will buy those ideas in, by the way, as well. And then they will effectively present them as a concept, and maybe it will be storyboards, maybe it will be kind of worked up into some kind of 3D experience, maybe it will be something else. And then there's various kind of gates and the green light process. You're like, yeah, that's interesting, tick, carry on, or actually it's gone off-road a little bit, so stop. A lot of it is about kind of managing your resources as well. But the reality is, for these industries, you have to take a punt on creativity sometimes, and that comes with risk, because in film, it's why directors that have kind of delivered once, it then becomes much, much easier for them because they are a known quantity that people believe can deliver it again. But you are kind of having a bit of a gamble, because if you don't open on that opening weekend, you could have spent $40 million and never make that back. So you have to balance this kind of creative belief with all of the data that you have on that journey to ultimately make the right decisions. But to the gaming example, yes, there are studios that you can kind of approach that are then affiliated with certain, like Xbox or Sony, and then there are pathways in with ideas as well. So yeah.
Creative process, or
is
it more so once you've got the stats and then else actually, because you could have 80%, 90% great stats and it still could fall through?
Yeah, I mean there absolutely are kind of creative kind of risks that have to be taken. I think when it becomes challenging is when you've taken that creative risk and then you get input or insight which tells you it's problematic. Now, to give you an example of that, I don't know whether anyone remembers the Cats movie. So Cats is a musical. Tom Hooper, fantastic director, a musical that many people know. Musicals can do very well. Look at Mamma Mia and so on and so forth. And when we greenlit it, it was like, great. Yeah, of course. Great director, great musical, Judi Dench, Taylor Swift, James Corden. What's not to love? Like, you've got all these people in it. It's going to be great. As we started seeing things, it was looking increasingly strange. And then you have to have some tough conversations, because do you continue to spend because you've committed and you've told the world, How do you manage that? And I think that's when the data helps you risk manage in the right way. If done well, it's not everybody does that well.
Hi. Okay. That was an exceptional talk, by the way. I really resonated with it as someone who has a similar path to you, being an academic and trying to get into audience development myself. I wanted to ask, could you, give us maybe a bit of a breakdown of like your framework when you're given a task to like break down an audience or try and reach a certain audience, like as someone who's, much higher in that career ladder? Want to hear more about that.
Yeah, interesting. So I think there are some kind of obvious approaches that you can look at, which is kind of understanding who is your core audience, who is your stretch audience, like how do you segment your audience in the right way. I think increasingly, and I've been on a journey in this space, right? Because 20 years ago, understanding of audiences was men 18 to 34 or housewives. Like it was as simplistic as that. And of course, there's far more granularity and complexity. Exactly. We're now in a world where we have all of that data, which enables much more sophistication. But I think, again, if I'm focusing more on the output and the end user, who are you doing this work for and what do they need to know? Because you can have a real depth of data about your audience, but actually they may have some one fundamental question that is much more simplistic. So I think it's about tailoring that to the question that you get asked or to the end need, as opposed to being kind of as granular as you can be. But yeah, nowadays we have access to, vast, data sets. You can understand what's happening on TikTok and where is that geographically and so on and so forth. You can keep getting more and more granular to build up that understanding and then that audience strategy.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the speech. It was really insightful. I was just wondering, you were speaking about advertising to different countries, and I was wondering which one was the most difficult, and whether you could speak to kind of current consumer trends given the current geopolitical environment, and whether there's been a change. So, for example, in sweet treat culture, or whether there hasn't really been as much of a shift.
Great question. I'll give you an example. So yes. Insight across different markets can be really quite different. And to bring it to life for you, so I was working on the Grinch movie in like 2015. I don't know whether you guys know the Grinch Who Stole Christmas. He's like a green character, big with kids, from Dr. Seuss. It comes from the US. And we were remaking this, the makers of Illumination, that make the Minions, were doing a Grinch movie. And that's great. And in the US, it was going to be big, regardless. But actually, there was a real opportunity to make something like this land in markets more distant from the US, so Korea or Japan or China. And if you could crack those markets by really understanding the audiences within those markets, the growth potential would be sizable. There are billions of people in China, right? So if you can make an IP connect there, or Japan, you have a good chance to do well. So I was looking at some audience insight and trying to understand how the film might work. The local team, so our local Japanese team, they were like, guys, the Grinch is never going to work in Japan. First of all, Christmas is not a thing. We're not a Christian country. We don't celebrate Christmas in this way. No one's going to understand what the Grinch is stealing. 2, the Grinch is green and ugly. And if you look at any Japanese character, like anime character, they are kawaii, they're cute, they're cuddly, they've got big eyes, they're absolutely adorable. The Grinch is like the antithesis of this character. They were like, just don't even bother. But there was this really interesting, rich vein of audience insight coming out from understanding Japanese culture and cinema goers. And one of those areas was that for a lot of young people, a lot of cinema goers, they are deeply lonely in Japan. They're more digitally connected than ever, but physical experiences, there's a real loneliness epidemic culturally. And actually the Grinch character, for anyone that knows the story, he's basically been ostracized to the top of a mountain and he wants to steal Christmas. He's a very lonely character. There's a lot of kind of pathos and a lot of, I think, relatability in his story. And also within the story we were making, we were doing flashbacks to a baby version of the Grinch. And this baby Grinch was adorable. He had big eyes and was super kawaii. And I was looking at this stuff and thinking, there has to be a way in, to this IP. It might not be the obvious, but maybe there is a way in. And honestly, we got a lot of pushback, and there was a lot of kind of a need for kind of tenacity, but eventually we got it over the line. If you Google the Grinch poster in Japan, you'll see it. Now you can see the baby Grinch, totally different to how that looked in USA, for example, where they know this character, very different, way to articulate this film. But that keeps coming back to your point around, if you can understand geographically different cultures, it's incredibly powerful and can make a real difference. So that's just one example. So what was your second question about the speed of culture right now?
It was just talking about changing trends, because you did talk about coronavirus earlier, but it's talking about the current geopolitical situation, whether it be kind of like the cost of living, sweet treat culture, and just kind of whether there is, as well as the demand for increasing personalization, and just how that's kind of changing, especially in your role at Lego.
100%. So I think all big entertainment brands are trying to understand this more broadly. I think there are many. So the way I would talk about them are there are kind of slow culture trends, and then there's fast culture. So fast culture is what's happening here and now. It's the memes, the moments that we're all seeing around us. Some of it might be fads and disappear. Other things can appear and stick around a bit longer. Labubu is maybe one example. But that actually connects to a deeper slow culture thing that's happening, which is around this notion of ugly cute. Ugly cute is huge in Asian culture and coming to the West as well. Labubu is just one manifestation of it. So a lot of brands are really scrambling, I think, to really understand these implications. To use your example there, COVID, post-COVID, and kind of connects to a point I made before, we are living in a world right now where there are perma-crises happening all around us. And there's this real desire amongst consumers to kind of seek comfort, right? And brands and products and services that offer people comfort. And Lego, I think, is one of them, by the way, because it is nostalgic and so on and so forth, are seeing huge growth. Look at Jellycat as an example, right? I was looking at a stat the other day, the amount of people in the world that are going to bed with soft toys now is growing exponentially. But I think it talks to this kind of deeper kind of crisis that we're sitting in. So there are these bigger trends. That's one of them. Loneliness is another one. Digital and AI saturation. Like a lot of people are saying, I want to disconnect from my phone. I want to consciously have physical embodied community experiences. I want tactile. People want to switch off from digital and they want physical experiences. And I think the brands that can really understand these shifts, fast and slow, are much better positioned to harness them or kind of react to them. But it's not easy to do, and a lot of brands are scrambling to do it.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey.
So my question is a little bit more about self-care and career development. And earlier you said about not burning bridges when building relationships. But I also feel that we are in a circumstance where we have a lot of red pill information around us to say network with everyone and such, but it can also burn us out trying to sustain relationships and maintain them. What would your advice be to essentially everyone in this room when understanding which relationships that you might want to invest into yourself to maintain and how not to burn yourself out so that by the end of the night you have no social battery and such?
That's such a good question, and I think so relevant to I'm sure all of us here. I think it comes down to, again, knowing what is important to you and where, with the finite pool of energy that you do have, you can focus those energies. So for me right now, I'm focusing more on family, whereas pre-family, I could have much more resource to do more of the kind of networking in the kind of corporate sense of the word. But I think being clear around where you want to go and what you want to do will enable you to know the different people in your network that are more likely to be worth cultivating in the longer term. And by cultivate, I mean, that sounds quite dry, but you don't need to be best friends with everybody, but it's kind of connecting with them. It's a high maybe once every 6 months or 12 months. It's kind of light touch as well, because you'll often find within these creative industries, they're quite small worlds. I mean, you said it, Grace, as well, and you will keep seeing the same people. So who are those individuals that are more proximate to where you want to go? If it's you want to go into music or fashion or whatever it may be, advertising, there will be key people that you should probably stay more proximate to and use that resource to do that. But I think self-care is so important. You burn out, then you're not going to be able to. So you have to have an eye on that for sure.
How's it going? First off, thank you for the knowledge that you shared. This one's a little bit more of a personal question. I want to know how you deal with doubt, because myself as an artist, I love making music and I love singing. I love performing in front of people, but a lot of the time there's certain projects where I look at it and I'm like, you know, maybe that won't be the project that I should drop. A lot of people are telling me, okay, cool, this is something that you should drop, but then for myself, I don't necessarily feel like this is the one. So I want to kind of know how you deal with doubt in your industry.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. Look, I think anyone that tells you they don't have any doubt is probably lying to you. I think imposter syndrome is absolutely real, and it is real at all levels. You know, I meet people all the time that are going into these boardrooms in these, you know, enormous organizations, and they're feeling the imposter syndrome because it is human to do so. And I think as well, you know, I reflect on my own background where there weren't really many people like me within those spaces, right? Because in film, everyone's kind of networked to someone, and, you know, they've got families that have been supporting them so they can live their passion of doing film PR or whatever the case may be. And you sit there thinking, should I be here? And those thoughts are very natural. But I think as I've gone on my own journey and reflected, okay, they're there, move past them. And acknowledge that, you know, that it's always going to be there, and this imposter syndrome is real and probably follows all of us and at all levels. But I think if you're deeply passionate about something and you're convinced it's the right thing, then you should hold on to it and chase it. And, you know, a funny story. So before A Friend of Dorothy got made, I spoke to a friend of mine, again, in the film industry. He was my boss at one point. I have a lot of respect for him. And by the way, I would advocate for finding people that can... Mentor might be a strong word, but like that you feel like you can bounce ideas off that maybe aren't in your direct industry or area, because I think it's really, really useful. And I said to him, look, there's this film and we're trying to make it, but the end goal would be to try and get it onto like a Netflix or a Disney Plus. Do you know anyone that you could hook me up with that I could just have a chat with? Because it's not normal to get short films on these platforms. And he's like, it can't be done. I'll go to it. It just can't be done. I really respect this guy. He's great. And despite him saying that, I was like, okay, let's try again somewhere else. And I think it comes back to this kind of tenacity, and people will tell you no. But I think if you can't get in the front door, go in the side door. If you can't get in the side door, try the back door. If you can't get in the back door, go through the window. You just have to keep going.
Hi.
Hello.
My question is, you mentioned James Bond having an aging population. And not audience, sorry. And you are trying to understand what perhaps the younger generation would want to see in something like that.
Yeah.
And my question is, what strategy do you use? Because personally, I find that when media and movies from, you know, that already have an audience try and pander to a younger audience, it doesn't come across well, in my opinion. I think it kind of panders to what they think they want to see, as opposed to what they can necessarily take and feel from the movie. So I just want to understand, what strategy do you use for that?
Yeah, lovely question. So I think it comes down to the quality of the input first. So if you're trying to understand what young people want from James Bond, how are you getting that from them ultimately? So to not get too technical, focus groups, sat with young people, online testing, sending them out kind of questions, sitting with them at screenings. These are all really, really useful inputs. And it's critical you have quality data, right? Because bad in, bad out, realistically. So if younger audiences are saying, you know, it's just not relevant, it's my granddad's movie. By the way, people were saying, like, this is an IP for my granddad, I don't want to see this. How are you capturing the right insight? Is it quality? But the more important thing is, what is the culture that is translating that and making decisions off of that, right? Because some people just don't want to hear. They want to tell themselves that, you know, we're going to make it for young people regardless. It's going to happen, and then they go on this journey, and then lo and behold, it doesn't connect. So I think the really successful organizations, brands, individuals are those that are able to react to this kind of input in the right way, so they understand it and they can bring this art and science together, which is ultimately what it is, to deliver in the right way to the audience. And this tension of art and science within the creative industries is a fascinating one and a big one, and I could talk about it forever, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you both for an amazing talk that you gave. I really enjoyed it. So aside from, as someone who's pivoted between roles myself, I've sort of worked at Universal, I'm currently working at Sony, and I found that making those pivots sometimes feel a bit scary. but can actually be very rewarding when you get to the other side. And now currently I'm doing career mentoring, and that's sort of my giving back. So my question to you is, what would you say is that thing that you're sort of giving back, or allows you to feel like you're sort of feeding that side of giving back? And if you wasn't doing your current role now, what would you be doing? And also, what is the next pivot for you?
That's a great question. So the giving back piece, I think, for me is within the board roles that I've taken on, and the reason I've kind of moved into those spaces is I really wanted to, in the finite time that I have, give back in a really meaningful way. So if I can really help comic relief shift by 1 or 2%, that makes enormous impact. You wouldn't believe like the food poverty in the UK right now. It's horrible to see. And if I can contribute the finite time I have in that space, I feel like that's going to make a meaningful difference. I sat there, I remember thinking I could give, I don't know, £20 a month to Cancer Research UK, which is a perfectly legitimate, viable thing to do. And I would want to do that. But actually, can I give time and can I make a difference? That's why I very deliberately moved to these organizations where it speaks to something I'm passionate about. So, helping people from more marginalized communities get access to these spaces, but also giving back in a way that it could be sizable if we do it well. So that's Comic and kind of Somerset House. What's next for me and what I mean, great. Honestly, I would love to sit here and tell you that I had a really clear plan, but much like 10-year-old me, 15-year-old me, and 25-year-old me, I have really no idea what I want to do next. I think the difference is I'm maybe a bit more at peace with that at this point in time. There are brands I would love to work with. Nintendo would be amazing as a fanboy, and that's again just like a little childhood thing. But let's see. I think I spend a lot of time kind of reflecting as well, and I think that's an important part of all of our journeys. Kind of, you do change as a person, you do change, and you need to kind of reflect and kind of ruminate on that. So, yeah, Nintendo would be lovely.
Thank you, Grace, and thank you, Elliot. I thought this is really inspiring to hear your story for someone who doesn't come from a complete different industry. So I think what's more interesting is to hear about your career shift from the very beginning, working in advertising and media, and then like naturally evolving to marketing, then towards to a role now, which is, from what I'm hearing, it sounds very strategic on how the audience development piece instead of influence within the organization to develop to working with like cross-functional stakeholders to have like different categories and then to speak to the audience with a relevant consumer product. So I'm very interested to hear how people shift from that career, from marketing, that you come from marketing to now towards more strategic and then research, strategy, analytics role. Like, what are the steps that you take at the first place, and what sort of advice you would have give for everyone in the room?
Thank you. Good question. I think, look, at the end of the day, these shifts, I mean, this lady here referenced it, they're not easy. They can be quite scary to make, again, because you feel like maybe you're not the most knowledgeable person in the room about a specific area. But I think having that curiosity, having that openness to learn, equipping yourself with the relevant skills that you can in advance will set you up as well as it can to be able to kind of move into these different places and spaces. Partly I maneuvered around because I also want to experience more, but I also want to kind of future-proof myself in a sense as well, right? Because, I didn't know 15 years ago that film would be in quite a tricky spot at the moment. There's a lot of redundancies in that industry. If I just stayed in film my entire career, I might be a bit more concerned than I am right now, where I've kind of worked across lots of different sectors, and I feel like could offer value in different places and spaces. So that was kind of a somewhat deliberate choice on my part. But I think I'm also reflecting on the fact that I'm wired in such a way that I just want to experience new things as well. If I love it, but there's only so many Fast and Furious and Minions you can work on before you want to try something new. And then Lego came along, and Lego was not at all what I expected. I went into this organization and this brand thinking it was going to be X, and it was Y. But that is, I think, part of the journey, and that need for kind of flexibility and adaptability and curiosity is what will put you in good stead to succeed in all of these different places that you'll move into.
Thank you.
They were incredible questions, and thank you so much for everyone for coming, and thank you so much for the chat. That was so good. I think a huge round of applause all around.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching How to Become A. Please like and subscribe and share with everybody you know so we can continue to interview many different industries and share their stories with you. Thank you so much for the support.